Francesca Donner has had a somewhat unusual journalism career in that she never aspired to be a reporter or have her own bylines. Instead, she started out her career as an editor and rose through the ranks of places like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. But though she wielded some influence at these publishers, she was always frustrated by the lack of female viewpoints, both in terms of who was writing the articles and who was being interviewed for them. So in 2022, she launched The Persistent, a sort of online magazine that's written entirely by women. In a recent interview, Francesca talked about her experience working in mainstream media, how she's trying to build an interactive community with The Persistent, and why she's been hesitant to lock content behind a paywall. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this interview, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Francesca, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
So we're here to talk about this publication that you run called The Persistent. I'd love to just talk about your background first, though, because obviously you have like a really good pedigree in terms of the types of outlets you've worked for. You worked for the Wall Street Journal, you've worked for the New York Times, and I'm sure some of the stuff that you did there informed what you're doing now. I was looking at your LinkedIn. It looks like, a lot of editors, they start off as reporters and then they eventually, go over to the editing side. It looks like you were pretty much an editor from the very beginning. Am I surmising that correctly?
You are surmising it correctly. That was about 15 questions, but I will do my best to get to all of them. Yes, I am an editor, and I've always been an editor. I have never, strictly speaking, been a reporter. And I have a thought on that, if I can share it with you. I know it's
Yeah, because I'm always fascinated because I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the reporter to editor pipeline is more common than the people who have been editors, but there are people who have done this, and I've always fascinated by those people that they never wanted to, like, be front and center. But yeah, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear your
so I'm
thinking
not
on it.
even sure that the reporter to editor pipeline, it makes sense on paper and in sort of management speak, but I'm not even sure that it's such a natural and clever pipeline, because I think the reality is that some people are just editors and they can't turn it off, and that's who I am. And some people are writers and reporters and they can't turn it off, and that's who they are. And by the way, some reporters are really wonderful reporters who also can't write, and some wonderful writers are really wonderful writers who also can't report. So there's all kind of these nuances in who you are and what you do. But for me, being an editor is the thing that I can't unsee it. I can't turn it off. And may sound a little bit ridiculous, especially as I'm, rather old now, in my 40s. But I was thinking about when did I first become an editor? When did this thing become so ingrained in me? How did this start? And I was thinking back to it, and I remember so clearly when I was 11 and I was sitting in the classroom, and we all had to write, stories or something for, one of our English homeworks. And one of the stories that one of the girls wrote, I went to an all girls school, I grew up in England, it was all girls. One of the stories that one of the girls wrote, the teacher thought was really good. And so she read a portion of it out to the classroom. And I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my gosh, her word choice, that makes so much sense. And this young 11-year-old, by the way, she didn't go on to become a writer or anything of the sort, but this 11-year-old had written a story about this family around the breakfast table, and the father was sort of behind the newspaper and rattling and sort of rustling the newspaper, and everyone else was discussing things at the breakfast table. And apparently, as I recall, at one point he peered around the newspaper and sort of put his nose out and then went back to reading the paper. And I know it sounds bizarre, but in that moment, I just thought she had so captured this emotion at breakfast, this feeling, this family dynamic, and the father behind the paper, and the mother and the children who were all talking. And she was only 11. This writer who had to do it for an English homework. And I think in that moment, that is this sort of cohesive moment for me, where I didn't realize I was going to become an editor, but it became it. As I look back, I realized these words, these putting together of these words, was so profound to me. And again, I didn't really realize it at the time, but even when I was in university, I remember I had a wonderful English professor. She was, adjunct as people always are at universities, but she was writing a book and she sort of sent it my way. Oh, Francesca, do you want to have a read of this? And I said, yeah, sure. And I just couldn't help but say, this word, that word, how about this, restructure that. And now, sort of looking back in retrospect, all the pieces were there. So that is why I'm editor. Sure, I sort of like to write, but what I really like is to rewrite other people's writing, and I can't turn it off. So there you have it. That's why I'm an editor.
Yeah, there was I don't know if you read it, but there was a viral Gawker essay in the 2010s, I think by Max Reed. I could be wrong, and we can't look it up now because I think all the archives have been wiped. But I think that the clickbaity or the headline was "against editors" or something like that, and he kind of he made the point. It's not that he his point wasn't that editors were worthless, but that the career trajectory of a journalist, in order for you, the way that like publications work is in order for you to keep on moving up, you eventually have to, and getting higher and higher salaries, you have to become an editor. And just because you're a good writer does not mean you're going to be, a good editor. And he was kind of making an argument is we got to change journalism so that people can just continue moving up in their careers without making the jump from being writer to
That's
editor.
exactly right. So I haven't read that particular piece, but I do agree with this. And this was sort of the point I was making when I said that pipeline is not necessarily a really productive one for people, because there are certain people who just need to write, but there's also this very strange kind of hierarchical thing built into the management of newsrooms. And especially when it comes to things like, a guild or a union, that sort of editors are this sort of managerial layer and reporters or writers are underneath. And I think that's really unconstructive, because it's such a partnership. And you know, my role as an editor is to sort of serve as a partner, a sounding board. Occasionally I'm, the therapy couch for people, quite often actually, to encourage when encouragement is needed, to pull back when pulling back is needed, and also to warn when someone is about to go tearing off into territory that I think they don't want to go into. And so, it's a service position, right? It's a service role. And I guess I sort of love the idea of making someone's work the absolute best it can be. Of course I do. I mean, that sounds a bit trite to even say it on this podcast, but it's so thrilling to me to craft something into something that I think is really excellent. And but I just don't, I find that pipeline that you just referenced really unnatural for people. And there are people who have had, I've been in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal for years, who've had long, long, long storied and wonderful careers, and they never, I'm putting this in quotes, I hope everyone can see or hear my quotes, progress past being a reporter or an editor, which is nonsense, because one doesn't progress out of something that one is really, really good at. So stop trying to sort of, not you, but like, I think we should stop trying to force this idea that, oh, you've been reporting so long, now is the prize that you can go on and be an editor. It's just not natural. So
And being an editor, like it's got to be so hard. Like it takes a patience to like look at a 3,000 word article and know there's there's stuff wrong with it, like structurally, and making them go back into that draft and change things. Like it's a skill set I don't have. Like there was, I remember listening to a podcast interview with Ben Smith, who's now the editor of Semaphore. But when he got hired from Politico, where he was a writer, to edit BuzzFeed, had all this like he had all this VC money at the time that he could use to hire these like big name magazine writers and stuff like that. And he talked about he hired some like Rolling Stone journalist or something like that, and the journalist turned in an article, and Ben Smith just did some like simple line edits, like rewording some things and stuff like that, and he gave it back to the writer, and the writer was like, what is this,
horrified,
like
right?
like
Right?
like because he was used to like actually
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
edited. He's like, I throw stuff in there that I know that you're going to take out, like that I'm just there's famous anecdotes of like New Yorker writers throwing factually incorrect information into articles, knowing that the fact checkers will find the true figures and replace them.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I just thought that was a
No,
great
it's
anecdote.
it's brilliant. And it's sort of, it's unacceptable. What do you mean you only changed two things? That's not acceptable. And on the rare occasions that when I write, and I send it to, one of my fellow writers or editors to take a look at, and they're maybe more used to writing, so they change two things, and I'm like, no, 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 that's not allowed. You please put your heart and soul into this, as I would do for you. Don't be scared, because this is the job. I think, look, I don't know Ben Smith intimately at all. Uh, Although, as it turns out, a fun fact, I did actually go to boarding school in the UK with the woman who went on but to become his wife. But I think of him as a writer. He's a writer. He is an editor conceptually. I mean, he can, and he's obviously a business builder, and he can build things, and he's really good at that, and he's good at kind of attracting people. But at the end of the day, I have never had this discussion with him. I'm so speculating, but he can't help writing, right? When he was launching Semaphore, he was also writing a book, right? That's what writers do. Josie Cox, who works with me really closely on The Persistent, she's a writer. She can't turn it off. It's therapy for her. If we're sitting there going, what should we run next week or whatever? Oh, I could write this, I could do that. And she can do it fast and efficiently, and it's calming for her in some sort of therapeutic way. And in the same way, for me, you said, oh, editing's so hard. It's not, it's actually calming for me. I sort of, one of the sort of metaphors I think about, the metaphor for editing is like detangling hair. So you take a comb and you sort of slowly untangle everything, and then I feel more calm about it. I think for me, editing is quite calming, because my life often feels sort of disorganized and chaotic. But editing is, I can get my hands around this piece, I can sort of grab hold of it, restructure it, make things sound the way I want them to sound in the voice of the reporter, while preserving what she's trying to do, and make her sound really good. And then I feel that at least this one thing in this crazy, and I don't even have the words to describe the world that we are living in, this one thing feels sort of controlled and smooth and cohesive and coherent, and it's getting you from point A to point Z, I guess, in a beautiful arc. And isn't that what we're trying to do? So I can control it. So maybe that's why it's calming for me.
Do you think like editing fiction, like a novel, is even harder? Because like it's like a story that doesn't even like isn't even rooted in facts, so it could literally go in any direction.
I have not been in the position of editing fiction. I would say that uh, it, it's probably a similar skill set, where you see your writer kind of going off the rails, and you want to kind of pull them back, and they've got this brilliant idea, and you're like, nobody knows what you're talking about. You've completely lost the thread here. Bring it back, develop this, push this down. We want this little tiny slice that you just kind of dropped in is actually really good and worth expanding on. So I'm guessing, the difference, of course, is that, a book is, a vast thing, but maybe fiction editors kind of break it down chunk by chunk. When I'm reading, oh, this is so terribly unfair, but when I'm reading non-fiction books, which are essentially, maybe it's sort of what essentially would be, multiple essays all packed together in one single package, I am sort of slightly loosely editing them in my mind. Not always. It's not that not in a critical way, but oh, I would pull this back, or I wouldn't have done this, or I don't know why they use this word choice or whatever. Because, as I said, I can't turn it off. So maybe a book is harder. Maybe nonfiction, you kind of sort of think about that and break it down. But fiction editors, God bless them, I know a good story when I read one, but I can't write. I know I can't write one either.
So let's do kind of a speed run through your traditional media
Mm.
career. I know you were at the Wall Street Journal, you were at the New York Times, and then a brief stint at Quartz. What were you doing before the Wall Street Journal?
Before the Wall Street Journal, I was figuring out who I wanted to be. But technically, I my first media job was actually at GQ magazine. So there was a time in my life when I felt that the absolute pinnacle of what my life's purpose should be would be to be an editorial assistant at a magazine, and it really, really had to be Condé Nast. Which, in retrospect, is sort of As it turns out, I was fortunate enough to secure this role, thinking it would be, the ultimate dream job. And as it turned out, it could not have been a less appropriate role for me. I was not too interested in celebrity culture. I was doing this in New York, but with, English sort of sensibility, and just wasn't aware of all the TV shows to which people were referring, and I wasn't aware of all the sports people were just
You were Andy from Devil Wears Prada,
so,
basically.
I mean, it was really something. I certainly, enjoyed the perch as far as sort of watching, observing, the Condé Nast machine is real. It's certainly in its time. When I started at GQ, Art Cooper was still the editor in chief, and he was certainly a legend. And it was very fascinating to watch. By the way, in case you're going to ask, I haven't read Michael Grimbaum's book yet, the Condé Nast Tell-All, but it is on my nightstand. I figured you'd want to know.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. There's the Graydon
There's
Carter.
the great.
I don't have like so. I have a news. One of my I have a newsletter that does rounds up the best long form journalism every week. And the one I love reading like long form magazine stories, but the problem is I never get to read books anymore because like any spare time that I have for like pleasure reading is going towards like reading long form journalism. So like I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to sink my
You're
teeth
you're
into
you're
that
not my
stuff.
friend. As long as you're feeding that beast, there are no books. But okay, so here's this other idea I had, because nobody has time to read books, but everyone, not I don't know that everyone, but we were sort of tossing around the idea of like, wouldn't it be fun if at the Persistent we started a book club? And I said, but nobody has time to read books, so can't we just have a book club that's actually an article club? Because you basically have just about enough time to make it through half of a New Yorker article, maybe.
Yeah, you can write. You could read it like an hour before
Exactly.
the club starts. Yeah,
Um,
there are magazine reading
yeah.
clubs. Like there was one in DC that was specifically for the New Yorker. I think it was female only. Otherwise, I would have joined it. But yeah, there are some
Oh, I didn't I
magazine
didn't know about
clubs.
that. But I mean, we have to be realistic. I'm reading books again because they're a form of escape. So I'm reading, but anyway, I still haven't read the Condé Nast book, so it's sitting there staring at me with its beady eyes.
So when you were at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, you kind of like you didn't have like a specific beat. You were kind of floating between projects and stuff like that,
Mm,
right?
so I went, so uh yeah, so when I joined the Wall Street Journal, that was really kind of my first, the magazine job was magazines. This was my first job in a sort of very big newsroom of that sort. And I was, back then it was still divided up into the print side and Wall Street Journal online. I think we had like different cards, and it was sort of like this sort of separation. It's so bizarre to look back at
Really,
that
that
now.
late?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
well,
I mean, like the Washington Post had their print paper was in D.C. and their
yeah.
online was in Northern Virginia. So there were lots of
There were a lot
examples
of
of
it,
that
and
in two
I
thousands.
did a brief stint at Forbes as well, and they had, Forbes online was like in a different building from the print magazine. But I mean, anyway, this was sort of back in the day when people were trying to figure it out, and thinking that all you need. I don't think it was this ridiculous, and certainly not. The journal had sort of more or less figured it out, but it was sort of those early days. Remember when people thought, oh, all you need to do is just roll the print story online, and that will be great, and then you realize that's not the experience that people are looking for at all. So anyway, I started at the Wall Street Journal, and it was really my first job in a big newsroom, and they hired me as the community editor, which was a job that I found quite intriguing. Actually, one of the things I had to do was write the question of the day, that would go into the print paper, and of course, it being the journal, it had to be very business and economic centered, which was not my particular expertise. But the questions would be around, do you think the Fed should raise rates? Yes, no, no way. Or what's the price of oil going to be 6 months from now, or whatever. So that was sort of, what it got me thinking about was actually really thinking about the sort of interaction between, our readers, our audience, our journalists, and I'm actually glad in a way that I started with that, because it made me so much more aware of, who are we writing for? Is this clear? Are they understanding what we're asking? What do they have to say? And kind of really thinking about that back and forth, which I like, which I think is a good thing. And then moving on at the journal, again, I was in the online newsroom, so I felt like I feel like I was sort of a Jane of all trades doing a lot of different things. But I did start, that was kind of my first foray into really thinking about how can we cover women? Because certainly at that time, and I would say, newsrooms haven't changed that much. It's not pointing the finger at the journal, but, women weren't very much in the pages of the Wall Street Journal. And I wanted to see if there was anything we could do to change that. And, you know, I can't change the world, but I can change to some extent, like our decision to cover people more deliberately and to make sure that certain people who aren't normally seen are seen. And so, that's we tried a few different projects, and we got a lot of pushback for our efforts to cover women, because I think a lot of readers felt
Like you were launching
we
verticals
launched a
based
vertical. We
focus
launched a
on.
vertical and we got pushed back because people, our readers were saying, you just saying only women should read this section, or are you just saying this is the part that women read? And it wasn't that at all. It was simply saying, if we don't make a concerted and deliberate effort to cover women, women won't be covered that much. And by the way, if you think I'm sort of like, making it up, or I'm just not. Like last week, or maybe it was the week before last, but I can get you the date. But in any case, this project that's been happening since 1995 came out with their latest. It's like a 5 year. It's sort of every 5 year study. It's called the Global Media Monitoring Project, and they just came out with their new data, and they find that, as usual, uh, men are quoted as experts about 75% of the time. Men still kind of create or the sort of center of most of the stories. When women are presented in stories, it's very often in these sort of stereotyped ways. And, perhaps they're the victim or the passive person that things are happening to. And you sort of think about it, seriously, in 2025, really, even now? And so, back when I was doing this at the Wall Street Journal, which was probably around 2008 or 2009, it felt really ahead of its time. But I would have thought almost that, things had been fixed by now, but they haven't really at all. And I mean, I guess that's what we can talk about with the persistent. But anyway, that's where I started out with at the journal. And it was.
I feel like with Emma Tucker now, I mean, I don't have any hard data on this, but I feel like she does commission a lot of, long form. As someone who edits a newsletter focused on
Mhm,
long
mhm.
form, I feel like I notice a lot of long form profiles of female founders. I don't know if you pay attention to that, what's going on at the journal
Look,
much
no, no,
anymore.
no. I love the journal, and I'll always be a fan of the journal, and that's great. And this is not a reflection of Emma Tucker or the journal in particular, but I think that I'm not talking about the journal at all here. But I think that we've seen a lot more newsrooms where you have a female editor in chief, um, but even when there is a woman running a newsroom, that doesn't really change, in my mind, for the most part, the DNA of that newsroom and what the newsroom decides is important and what belongs on page one and what doesn't. So, for example, and I'm not going to speak about specific papers, but you can sort of think generally, right? It might be very acceptable to have three or four policy stories on the front page of a paper, or if you're a business paper, to have, markets, economic stories on the front page of a paper. But a story about childcare, or a story about, unpaid labor, or a story about, the gender pay gap, these are things that are kind of not considered front page worthy. You don't see them there that much. And so it would be ridiculous to suggest that, big mainstream newsrooms are never covering women. Of course, that's nonsense. They're covering women in wonderful ways and with great profiles. All of that is true. But I think the stories that end up on the front page skew a certain way, and certain stories don't end up on the front page, and certain types of stories end up in places like the style section, and there are reasons for that, and that's fine. But I don't think it's balanced. I really don't. And to re-highlight that quote that I said, that number that I quoted before, men are quoted as experts 75% of the time across. That's a global thing, which means that women are seen as experts about 25% of the time, right? So you even have this sort of perpetuating thing where you sort of see men more, you see them more in these roles of sort of expertise and power and whatnot. And that is a little bit twisted. So I guess one of the things I'm trying to do with a persistent, and we can talk about that, but is sort of correct this imbalance a little bit. And I wish I didn't have to be doing it by saying, I'm going to just write stories that put women at the center. That also is completely unnatural and bizarre, right? But in order for me to sort of swing the pendulum back as best I can, that's what I can do. So I can say, right, my goal, since women's voices aren't really amplified in the same way, my goal is to amplify them really heavily and make sure that women are the center of the story and make sure that they're quoted as experts. And if you sit here and think, oh, yeah, well, that sounds fine, maybe that's just the news. Look at look at our world that reflects back to us, right? Congress is 25% women. There still aren't that many women, who are leaders of countries. You can look at the Fortune 500 and look at, the CEOs who are women. It's always this tiny portion. So in a way, this idea that, oh, well, women are quoted as experts 25% of the time, it makes sense, but it's not okay. And when you have women quoted as experts just 25% of the time, you're missing so many points of view and so many angles. So you don't want to just say, okay, well, we should quote women because it's the right thing to do. And by the way, women of color, LGBTQ, and the whole thing, right? It's not just that it's the right thing to do. It's because it creates a better story, a more interesting story, a story with more perspectives. If we keep quoting the same people over and over again because reporters are either lazy or on a deadline and they're like, oh my God, I got to find someone. Let's see who the Washington Post quoted. Okay, that guy looks good. I'll just ring him up. I know he can give a good soundbite. If we keep doing that, then we just get in this cycle of presenting the same voices all over again. And also a story that becomes a lot less interesting, because I would like to know what different people from different groups think about something or what their view on it is. They're going to have a different perspective. We all do. My perspective is different from yours. You see the world in your way, and that's fine. That's great. And the way I see the world, but it's just limited how I see the world. So what can I do? Bring in as many voices as possible to say, let's open up how we see the world. Let's bring in new voices, and let's bring in new writers, as many as I can, bearing in mind I've only been around for a year, and open that up so we can have a much richer conversation.
So you were able to do that at the New York Times, right? At least until they shut it down. Or what product did you, or what vertical did you launch at the New York Times?
So when I was at the New York Times, well, briefly I was running something called Times Insider, which that was going to take us down a whole other rabbit hole, but that was really quite fascinating project that was really trying to bring, I'll say en bref, okay, was trying to bring people kind of under the hood of the Times and go behind the scenes and show what the Times was doing, and
That was it was like almost like a PR, like a
it
communications thing, and saying
was, it
this
was.
this is the reporting behind the reporting,
It was,
or
but
like what's going on behind the
yeah,
scenes.
no, but if I may, this is a really important project. Okay, so forgive me. Can I talk about this for 1 second? Okay, so this is a really important project because the problem with journalism that and that I know, and probably the people who are listening to this know, is that people don't want to pay for journalism, right? We know this. And I think the reason they don't want to pay for journalism is because they don't understand that, or they don't want to understand that it actually takes quite a bit of money, quite a bit of time, quite a bit of effort to produce something. Nothing is simple. There's no, oh, we'll just quickly roll that into a newsletter and press send and that's it, right? Like this podcast alone is going to, it's time, it's effort, it's editing, it's production, it's packaging, it's you re-recording the intro, it's all of this work. And then it's disseminating it and telling people to listen to it. It's so much work. And one of the interesting things at the Times, when I promise I'm going somewhere with this, okay, don't worry. When I was at the Times, one of their problems, and therefore my problem, was that people didn't realize that so much work went into a single story. And, when as a consumer, maybe it takes you 2 minutes, if you're lucky that the person spends that much time to read the story, 2 minutes to read the story, or 10 seconds to read the headline, boom, done, move on, what's next? Uh, but a story, for example, to take a really good example, like, the Harvey Weinstein story, which, the Times broke, but everybody knew, right, that it was happening. But that story was almost impossible to get. It required putting, star reporters on a story that it wasn't clear at all for months, by the way. It wasn't clear at all that they were going to secure that story in the end. That's resources, it's commitment, there's so much to it. And so I think the reason I'm talking about Times Insider, this project that we were doing, and why it's so important to kind of show people a little bit about how the sausage is made is, it sort of shows these are the lengths that we will go to. And I can't speak on behalf of the Times because I'm not there anymore, but back when I was there, these are the lengths that the Times will go to create to create a story. And by the way, there are real humans behind here. And by the way, these are some of the, you know, sorry, these are some of the, values and ethics that we bring to our storytelling, and we need to communicate that to you. At the Persistent right now, I am not doing stories that take 6 months to report at this point. I wish I was, but there's not one of our stories that doesn't take hours, if not weeks, to figure out the story, figure out the angle, do the reporting, put together the art, do the editing. And it is massively costly, as you know. But how do we communicate that to our readers and say, readers are sitting there saying, $8 is a bit much, and I'm thinking, oh my God, can you imagine what a single newsletter costs to produce for the Persistent? We pay all our writers, we pay all our illustrators, of course, why should it be free? And one of the things, and maybe you can help me work this out, Simon, but like one of the things I'm struggling with so much is people will pay for coffee, they'll pay for some tickets and housing and food and clothes and even a garbage gimmick thing that they'll throw away the next day. But when it comes to journalism, there's this idea that it's cheap and free and throw away, because we consume it so fast and there's always something to replace the thing that came before. So
Yeah.
how do we
I mean,
communicate that?
I think it's a number of things. One, there was like that 10 plus year period
Yeah.
where all journalism was free. And so that kind of just like set the value rate that we still haven't completely come back from. Although I think we have made progress as an industry. And the New York Times deserves a ton of credit for this, for making people, and then the Donald Trump, at least the first Donald Trump administration, also recalibrated that you need to pay for good journalism to hold powerful people to account. Also, just there's just so much free content out there that a lot of people just convince themselves. It's like that, what we talked about, where I'll close that article when I've read two or three like terrible sentences. It's like, well, there's a million other things I could be consuming at any time. So I think that's a big
I
part of
mean,
it for sure.
it's sort of
And
it,
also, they just don't understand the business. I think the average consumer thinks, well, why can't you just put ads against it? Like,
mm.
advertising will pay for it. Why do I have to pay for it? Like just put. I see ads everywhere, so why can't that fund it? And they don't really fundamentally understand like that. The advertising model as it currently exists really is not enough to support the vast majority of sites out there.
Yeah, I think I would say the other thing that troubles me is, you do see these messages in, forgive me, I'm so sorry. You do see these messages, please upgrade, and there's such an element of sort of support the cause and please, and if you don't mind, and we know it's a bore, and instead of kind of demanding that people pay for a product, which of course, we're not in any position to do, but there's such an element of sort of pleading, and you know, I just
Because I
wonder.
think journalists want to be read. I don't know. Like I hate putting stuff. Like I do put stuff behind a paywall, but I
It's a
hate it because
tragedy, right?
like,
Yes, I know. It's
yeah.
awful. You want the maximum amount of people to read it, and talk about it, and that's the point. But it is. I do feel like we need to sort of communicate this, that it's expensive, and to sort of change this narrative around, like, if you don't mind, rather, and instead maybe replace it with, like, hey, you lucky thing, you've got this incredible podcast, like, you should be throwing money at Simon Owens with his amazing Substack, like, get on with it, right? So
I can't tell you how many like people send me emails like such a huge fan of your newsletter that I always check, and more than 50% of the time they're not paid subscribers, which I don't really begrudge them for that. I get annoyed when they want to bend my ear or something, like get on the phone with me to get my advice on something, and I'm like, I offer that as one of the perks of becoming a
mhm,
subscriber. Is you get a half
mhm.
hour phone call with me. You're such a huge fan of my newsletter, and you want me to give you advice, and yet you can't even bother to pay $100 a year. That's the thing that kind of annoys me. But anyway, I do want to get to the
Yes, yes.
persistent. Before we do, I just want you to talk briefly about the vertical you ran at the New
Mhm.
York Times. That was a gender focused, female focused. What was
Yes,
the
yes, yes, yes,
project?
absolutely. So while I was at the New York Times, we launched something called the Gender Initiative, and Jessica Bennett came on as the editor, and I was the director. And sort of at the outset of that, we launched a newsletter, actually, and it was right. It was right as Me Too was just kind of this huge, huge story. And I'm sure you remember the days of the sort of, I don't want to call it the heyday of Me Too, because that's just horrific. But basically, like, these stories would just drop like dominoes. I mean, it was two or three stories a day, and you kind of wake up and think, oh my God, who's next? So we started, we had the Gender Initiative, which was really to sort of think carefully about, what we were doing in this space. Then and as part of that, we launched this Me Too. We called it the Me Too moment, the Me Too moment newsletter, and that was really to sort of wrap our heads around the Me Too stories that were happening, and then that eventually sort of morphed in. I would morphed is a bit of an odd word, but anyway, morphed, if you will, into what we called the Gender Letter, and the Gender Letter was really to sort of think about all things gender. But as it turned out, we weren't able to do that with our small team and really cover the extent of the thing. We wanted to cover sexuality and identity, and trans people and men and women, and we couldn't do justice to all of this. And so then we sort of took a look at that and said, well, why don't we're just going to focus this on women now. We're just going to focus it on that. And it was renamed In Her Words. And so In Her Own Words is what stuck. And I ended up becoming editor of that. And when I became editor of that, it was right sort of as COVID was breaking. I was a little bit before COVID was breaking, actually, but I just remember, in the very early days of COVID, and I was, thinking about In Her Words, and thinking, we had all these stories lined up about, women on boards and fighting for pay. And then, and then COVID came along, and we thought, oh my God, how can I publish this story about, women on boards or female chefs or something, when like the world is literally falling apart? What are we going to say? And literally within 24 hours, it became so clear to me and the reporter I was working with, Alicia Haradasani Gupta, that this was so gendered, that COVID was so gendered an issue, right from everything from, PPE not being sized to fit women. It was sort of one size fits all, and then it was too big for women, to frontline jobs, to, the economics of who was staying in their work and who wasn't, to childcare and unpaid labor, and, domestic violence that was ticking up at home, to sort of how women were handling, birth and delivery in a COVID world. And you heard those awful stories of sort of women all alone giving birth, and it was so, I just, it was sort of, it was such a remarkable moment, really, for looking at women and kind of centering women, especially as kind of everyone's, people's eyes were opened in a way that's sort of like, okay, what's it really like managing the household in conjunction with managing a job and trying to do this and trying to do that and having all of these pressures on you. So, I think being able to be editor of In Her Words at that time for me was really, it was such a moment, and really gratifying, and something that I really, I loved doing it. I just, it was really great. And then the Times felt, and again, I can't speak for the Times. I'm not with them anymore, but I think they felt that that was that had had its run, and thank you very much. And I think, for me, that's fine. That's their decision, and that made sense for them. But I didn't feel thank you very much about it. I felt that there were a lot of readers out.
What do you mean? The newsletter solved everything, and then that now time to move
Time
on to new
to, time to
things.
move on. Time to move on. I mean, the Times is very good at moving on a lot. But I wasn't. I didn't feel ready to move on. I felt that there was very much a space in this market, and I felt that I had a lot of readers writing to me and saying, I'm quite disappointed, to put it mildly. And what else should I read? And I sort of felt, well, there are other things to read. And I mentioned a few of the publications that I like. The 19th had recently been launched, and there's the Meteor, and the Fuller Project's excellent, and but it didn't feel, this space just didn't feel saturated. And so I felt that there really is this place to tell these stories. There really is this place to center these stories. And I think, just from experience, I think that a lot of my experience in newsrooms, and also my experience talking with a lot of freelance writers who have good stories to tell, this isn't the priority of newsrooms. And these stories about women aren't always that easy to place. And so, that was when the Persistent was born in 2024. We're covering Women for a Change, and really kind of putting women at the center of the story in a way that I don't think mainstream newsroom do. And the other thing, and again, we talked about, okay, well, of course there's an exception here and there, and there are lots and lots and lots and lots of wonderful stories, but it's not the norm in my view. The other thing I was really, really trying to do was, this isn't Francesca Donner's Substack. We've already cleared up that I'm not the writer, right? I'm the editor. I'm the enabler, right? I'm the person who sort of creates the table and tries to bring people to it. And as I think about that, and I also am a consumer of a great amount of news and Substacks, as I know you are too. Even for us, Simon, right? It's overwhelming, the amount of Substacks and newspapers and magazines and articles and newsletters and Substacks and all of this sort of massive amount of information that comes to me. And the other thing I sort of realized at the time is, I subscribe to a lot of Substacks. By the way, I pay for a lot of Substacks because, I try to pay for as much news and stuff as I can. But even I wasn't able to read one particular reader 5 days a week or 3 days a week, and so all of those sort of individuals added up, made really a mountain of stuff that I had to consume. And so I thought also that, maybe there's really a service for our readership in saying, maybe, well, I'm not going to suggest anyone doesn't subscribe to Substacks, because they should, but maybe in addition, our service can be, we'll give you a slice of this writer and this writer and this writer and this writer and this writer. And we aren't going to sort of limit you to one topic. At the beginning, people said, oh, why don't you just do, women in leadership or women in sports or women in this and that? And it's like, well, because women is just a lens for me. It's just kind of an approach. But, these issues cross every thing that I've sort of come across, from, sport to culture to television to climate to, healthcare. Like, all of these things kind of fall under this purview. And so what I try and do is sort of create this richness of topics and this richness of writers, so that you're not always getting one kind of similar slice, or this I don't want to say the same point of view, but that same that framing from the same writer day after day, which is wonderful, which is why we love a lot of writers and follow them, but also can be quite rewarding to have new voices in there that kind of can shine a bit of a different light.
So you launched the Persistent in
Hmm.
2024. I was looking at it. It's not high volume publishing. Like, it looks like you're not publishing more than one piece a day. They're like mid-sized pieces, so these aren't like. It seemed like it wasn't like 5,000 word articles. It was kind of like, kind of like a long piece of analysis, or a long op-ed or something like that. I didn't see any ads. I didn't encounter a paywall. So tell me about the idea behind it. From like, I mean, you've sort of explained the editorial idea behind it, but like in terms of how this thing exists in today's media ecosystem, and you're able to pay those writers and pay yourself and the illustrators and stuff like that. Like, how do you see this fitting within the larger
Well, number
media
one, I'm not
ecosystem
paying
as a.
myself. So uh, I think that I would like to get to, we are a subscription product, okay? We are a subscription product. Some of our work is paywalled. Why is not all of our work paywalled? Because we aren't going in with the brand name of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or Bloomberg, or FT, or any one of these brands. When you are Bloomberg, you don't need to explain what Bloomberg is or does. People either say, yes, I'm interested and I want to subscribe, and that's fine, or I don't. When you are the Persistent and you've been around for a year, you do need to explain what you are and what you do, and give people a really good taste so that they can get sort of and find that sticky enough so that they can get to a point where they say, actually, this is something I want to exist and I want to pay for it because I like what they do and I want to make sure that its existence is assured. So, also, we're a really tiny team. Again, we're not the New York Times producing God knows how many stories a day, 600 or more. I don't know how many they produce, but we don't have that many stories because we are a tiny team, and it means that we have to keep a lot of our stories unlocked. We can't say, okay, we're going to go in there and lock down 75% of our stories, because if we're publishing, 4 or 5 things a week, that means you're only reading one, and if you miss that, then you didn't get any taste of what we're about, right? So I think it's really, really it's really, really tricky, because my job is to show you, hey, look, this is really high quality. We look very nice. We have beautiful illustrations on a lot of our stories, which hopefully kind of clue you into, like, this is actually quite a nice thing. Our stories are thoughtful. Most of them are pretty good. They're well edited for the most part, and but I have to give you that chance to sample, and I don't have reams of content for you to sample. So part of it is that. The other part is advertising. Absolutely, we are year one. We're growing an audience. We're not at a point, our audience is not that huge where we can go marching into JP Morgan Chase and say, hey, don't you want to advertise in the Persistent? We will be there, I have no doubt, but we're not there today, which means that growth is what we need to focus on right now, so that then we can go in and have those conversations. The overall goal, which is, I would imagine, the same with you and your Substack, is you have this universe of free subscribers, of which a nice slice of the pie is paying, right? Realistically, the entire universe is not going to be paid, or if it were, I'd have quite a small audience. And then it's always that trade-off of, but I want as many people as possible to read the good work that we're doing, because if I can't get that in front of everyone, then they can't know about us, and then they can't subscribe. So it's really brutal. The other thing I also think is this, though. I'm one of those editors who's not uncomfortable at all with the business side. I think there's so much potential of things that we can do with collaboration and partnerships, and I don't think a sponsorship has to be as simple as, like, oh, just slap a logo at the top of the newsletter and call it a day. I mean, sure, that's fine, but aren't there things that we can do that feel so much more exciting than that, that might be sponsored dinners, or some kind of solutions journalism roundtable, or sort of a bringing together of people. The event space is obviously really interesting. I think there's so much potential for doing things that feel quite high touch. And by the way, remember I said I really liked my first job at the Wall Street Journal that was community driven, because I think there is something about people feeling seen and heard and part of it and part of this kind of community. And I say to my team a lot, like, I want people to feel like they are card carrying members of the persistent. They're not literally members, right? And they're not literally carrying a card. But when they see something, they know it, they recognize it, they share it. And if they meet me or meet one of our editors, I want them to say, I love that. And that's still a message that I get from when I was the In Her Words editor. People come up to me when they've, they go, oh, who are you? What did you do? Da, 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 da. And then they hear, oh, In Her Words. Oh, I love that, right? It felt there was such an affinity with the work that we were doing. And I think that, we are ticking a very similar box here, because I don't think that these stories are regularly covered. So all of this is to sort of say, building this community growth, of course, right? Building this community, making it feel very high touch, being really present as an editor. And that's something we're working on really hard right now, to be sort of really visible and more visible, and tell you who we are and what we do. And we're launching our first editors chat not next week, the following week, where it's just going to be like two editors bantering. But some people may come and they love it, and then they're in, right? They got it. Like, we're interesting, we're intellectual, we're fun, we're going to listen to what you have to say, we're going to chat and sort of make you feel like a card carrying member. And so all of that, plus, again, if I can get to this point, of course, advertising, yes, but advertising in such a way that, I hope I don't sound too Pollyanna, but advertising goes wrong when you are getting the wrong product marketed at you, because you're just not interested in all of that. But when it's the right thing marketed to the right person, who's sort of sitting there thinking, maybe for our readers, it's menopause kit, showing up on your doorstep or something, like, well, that sounds quite appealing, right? Because that's our readership. And so thinking really hard about, or you know I don't know, certain types of clothing, whatever. I mean, it's sort of, are we meeting our readers where they're at? It's beneficial for us because we're trying to, we want to grow in that way. It's beneficial, of course, for the advertiser because they're meeting the right audience, but it's also beneficial for the reader because they're actually being given something or introduced to something that maybe is relevant and interesting. And then the other thing that I referred to before, which is sponsorships and things like that. There's so much potential. I think there's so much potential to have discussion and conversation and intellectual sort of rigor and problem solving, and sort of come together in this way. And I do feel, I don't know how you feel, Simon, I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, but I feel like in newsrooms we're awfully jaded about, oh yeah, what we do and what we, how we talk about things. But actually I think bringing in people who aren't normally in newsrooms, or haven't been a journalist, or haven't had the privilege of working in some of these cool places where you really see stories coming together, like, it's actually quite exciting. And so sort of inviting people into that, I think, is really cool. Just like, you say, I'll chat, for whatever your fee is, like, I'll chat to you, let's have an exchange. It's really exciting for people. And I don't mean to sound ridiculous about it. You know that. I know that. Come on. So that's the hopes and dreams for this business model. It's really hard. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not doing anything extraordinary. We are working really hard on products that will enhance our paid experience, right? Because again, year one was just get it into the universe, just get it up there, just start publishing stories, because it's very hard to communicate this. In my mind, it's very hard to communicate an editorial product, because it's really the sensibility of the thing. It's the look, it's the feel, it's the style, it's the tone, it's the approach, all of that kind of thing. So that was year one. So now year two, how can we bring in more paid subscribers? What are the things that people will pay for, and what won't they pay for? And if people ultimately say, hey, I love the persistent, but I'm not going to pay for your stories because stories should be free, or because we've all been sort of indoctrinated to think that journalism doesn't cost anything, or that it should be free, well, then maybe there are other things we can do. And that's when we start looking at, editors chat, or is it a book club, or is it some kind of merch item, or all these other, there's a lot of ideas, but it's all,
So was it like bootstrap? Did you get a grant to start it up? Like, how did you get it
it's
going?
self-funded.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you're publishing. So what's the kind of like? How often are you publishing per week? And like, what's the ratio of paid versus free?
So the ratio of stories that are in front and behind the paywall, everything start. This isn't how we started out. Actually, at the Persistent, we wanted to be able to lock down a whole lot more, but we realized having people taste and trial content was so important. So at the beginning, we put everything out, and then after about a month, we end up putting it behind the paywall. That's supposed to happen. The
So
fact that
okay,
you
so
found lots of
the
yes, yes,
archives
yes, yes,
are paid, but the everything for free
yeah,
now.
yeah.
And that's probably. I mean, so
And
I
that's a
mean,
common model. I mean, I don't think that's,
yeah. I mean, that's sort of what I
yeah,
do. So like, every single one of these podcast episodes, I turn also convert into an article, and then the article is behind the paywall, but the podcast is free to consume. But then I move the at the end of the month, I move the paywall up so that if you want to like consume the video on Substack, you have to become a paid subscriber. I see that. I think that works with like evergreen content,
it
especially.
does. I mean,
I mean,
well, here,
I'm guessing you're having a hard time like converting people right now under that model, but
yeah,
maybe you don't
yeah.
care
I
because you're
mean, the
trying to.
archives is really tricky, and again, it comes right back to this problem that we talked about before, which is the Persistent isn't known, so not yet, right? So one of the other issues, so there are certain stories that are evergreen that do consistently do well for us. One is about the hashtag boy mom for some reason, and the other one is about Henrietta Lacks, and those two stories, one of the is you could say, okay, we're going to be really aggressive, we're going to put them behind a really fixed paywall, but the downside of that, of course, is that people come to the Persistent, they don't know what we are, they don't have enough faith that this is actually worth something, that it takes a lot for someone to part with their credit card, right? So at the first instance, are they really going to pull out their credit card after reading a single paragraph and upgrade to paid? I think that's too hard to sell. And so some of the stories that are the most evergreen, we actually want to undo from the paywall, because those are the ones that people are likely to find, and then you know seed those stories with other stories that you hopefully go on and sort of poke around a bit. But it's I don't know what to say. It's brutal, right?
I mean, it seems like you. It seems like you have like positioned your expectations so that you've kind of written at least the first year off as being I need to build the
Yeah.
brand, and you didn't feel like you were under pressure to really ramp up the paid side because you were so focused on the brand. Is that an
Uh,
accurate kind of description?
I definitely felt like we need to be out in the world and we need to build the brand. That is definitely true. We have gone back and forth a little bit between saying, oh my gosh, we really do need to ramp up the paid, and we do, but it's always a trade-off. So if we're really focused on paid, we can't grow enough that we can actually be a real player in the advertising market, or go into a meeting and say, hey, wouldn't you like to collaborate with us on XYZ project and be a sponsor of a dinner or something, or whatever. So it's really like this constant sort of trade-off. And so now, of course, we're saying, okay, we really want people to upgrade to paid, we want people to perceive this as a paid and wonderful product, and therefore we're adding these things and experimenting a lot to see what does well, what doesn't do well. Is there something that tips people over into paid, or is that just not going to move the needle at all for people, while also continuing to grow? So I mean, I or we can say forget it. Forget about having people sign up for paid. But then the sort of habit is established that oh, we're free and it's free for all, and then suddenly you ask them to pay for something, and then it's like, well, I've been getting it all this time, and now it's kind of annoying to think that I have to pay for it. So I don't really have. I mean, this is like the persistent. This is the persistent
You're
media.
going to
This
be
is the
persistent
persistent
until you
media
figure it out.
problem. Like we all have
Yeah.
this issue. This is really. I don't know.
So how do you feel a year in then about how much you've grown the brand and the community? Do you feel like you're building a real fan base?
Yes, actually, I do, and I'm that's quite gratifying. I did not expect the fan base at the end of year one to be 1 million people, but I will say this: we did a survey a few months ago, and um, easily over 100 people filled it out, which is, not bad considering nobody actually fills out surveys. The people who filled in the survey spent a lot of time with it. They were very specific about, I love this, I think you should think about that. They took their time. And I realized that this is a set of, I don't know, it was like 120 people or something. This set of 120 people was essentially the core, right? This is, how I said those card carrying readers? This is that set, right? And those are just the ones who did the survey. I'm sure there are other people who feel this way, but you already felt this kind of affinity to the brand. I like this. This writer's really good. Do more of this. Let's have that. And I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm not expecting to have, a readership of, 1 million paying subscribers. It would be fine. I'm not complaining if it happens. But this core is sort of where it starts. And I think bringing that core in, and not all of them are paying at all, but sort of bringing them in, making them feel heard and connected, and us connecting with them. I want to know who they are, and I want to know what they think, and I want to be connected with them. And then sort of bringing them in a little further, like, hey, you read Francesca Donner's editor's notes every week. Like, how about you come and join a chat with her? Or, you love Emma Hazlitt's pieces on, infertility so much. Come meet her, come to our book club. Emma's going to be running it. So I think kind of this community thing is what I'm really, really interested in. I think there's a lot of value in that, and I think newsrooms traditionally have sort of overlooked it because all our job is to sort of tell the news and write the story and just put it out there and assume someone will find it. But I think this sort of exchange with people and really and listening and hearing and kind of bringing people together, especially in such a polarized world where people feel so quite lost and hopeless, and sort of saying, hey, we're your people. Like, let's talk about these things, let's have different opinions, let's bring this together, let's come up with some solutions, let's do something here. And it can be more than just a passive reading of a story. It's much more.
You should check out. There's a publication called Culture Study on Substack. She I don't. I mean, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but she has like a few thousand paid subscribers, and I don't think she locks anything behind a paywall. It's all community based. Like, you need to, like, she has discussion threads and stuff like that. In order to participate in the discussion thread, you have to be a paid
Yeah.
subscriber. So she's able to kind of have her cake and eat it too, in terms of. I mean, it's. I'm not. I don't want to like make it sound too easy to build, because like everybody would love to just do a community based
Yeah.
publication and keep all their content in front of the paywall. I don't know that it's possible for everyone, but given that you want to like build a community, maybe
Well,
that's an
I
option.
mean, but it's all experiment and try, right? Right. We got to take a chance on it. And so one of the things we've also been talking about is saying, and it's probably exactly what she's doing, and I will check it out. But maybe we have our comments open on a story, and the writer, the author, comes in and responds to some of those comments right there and then, or it could happen real time. That might be a bit unrealistic, or over the course of the next 24 hours. She's going to be responding to all of your comments, so put them in here, put your questions in here, and see how that. And I'm
You should make the comments free to read, but you have to
to
pay to
to to to
participate,
to put one
so
in.
that people can see what they're missing out
Yeah.
on, and that the person is actually going into the like. So you should have an open-ended discussion thread about issues that you're writing. I mean, now I'm just giving you advice, but
I'll take it. I mean, it's rough out there.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
So I want to just get to one other
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So like, when you're looking ahead to like 2 years from now, like, how do you get from point A to point B? Like, are you going to have to hire, or like, in terms of, is more of your stuff going to be behind a paywall? And then also you're talking about sponsorships, sponsored dinners and stuff like that. Like, what do you, if you had this like ideal, what does the persistent look like in terms of staffing and how big it is? Like, what do you want? Where do you want to be like 2 to 3
Yeah,
years
yeah,
from
yeah. It
now?
sounds so audacious, all those things that I mentioned over the course of this podcast. But I don't need to. I don't today. looking ahead 2 years, I might feel very differently in 2 years, but I don't feel the need to be a sort of a giant organization. I'm quite excited to be nimble. I'm quite excited to experiment. I'm excited to try things, and I'm not scared to table things that don't work, right? So I think, in 2 years, we're bigger. In 2 years, we've developed a few new products that make sense and align with our mission, right? Our mission is, amplifying women's voices, stories, perspectives, and ideas. So, in the service of amplifying women's voices, stories, and perspectives and ideas, obviously a podcast would be great, right? But it has to fit in with what we're doing. Obviously, an events business would be really great. We're experimenting right now with digital, Zoom events and digital events, and I think they can be really rewarding. But the sort of with this community piece, like the bringing together of people, could be very interesting. And maybe that's enough of a value add that people really are, signing up for that. Maybe it's, God, I'm really spitballing a bit here, but maybe it's book clubs that, we pick the book and then, start your own persistent book club in your own hometown or something, and people are sort of all reading, across the country, are reading the same book and coming back to share with the persistent, or, but I really, I can't state it enough. Like, whatever it is, I feel like it's going both ways. It is not, that original model of journalism from, years and years ago, where it was sort of like the paper was pushed out and everyone read it and that was the end of the conversation. Like, this is such a dynamic exchange, and I feel so strongly like I want to hear from readers. I want to know what they think. I want to know what they're seeing and feeling, and it, this sort of exchange is what I really care about. And the journalism aspect of it, these essays, which I call them like opinionated journalism, because they do have a point of view, but I feel like they're just sort of the springboard for the conversation that we should be having. Another thing that we're talking about is having a product as part of our newsletter that's sort of, a letter of recommendation. We need to think of a better name for it. But, I want, here's the podcast we're listening to. Here's the books we're listening to. This is not new. People have been doing it forever. But I also feel like it makes people feel like they're sort of being brought to the editorial table. And here's what we're chatting about. What are you chatting about? Right. And so I don't think any of this is particularly reinventing the wheel. I don't think the media. Okay, I mean, this is probably the worst thing I've said all day, but I don't think the media wheel specifically needs to be reinvented, although it also totally does. But I think, it's sort of really like creating something with our readers, that it's not just sort of unidirectional. It really feels like you're part of this, we're part of this, and that's exciting to me.
I assume you have a monthly option and an annual option for your subscriptions.
Hmm.
I think for the annual option, you should have something
Yeah.
physical, whether it's a yearly zine or a T-shirt, like some kind of a coffee cup, a T-shirt or something like that. I mean, I don't know if you followed what happened with the New Yorker with their tote bag, and just like now at least in DC, I'm assuming the same thing in New York. Like, everybody has the New Yorker tote
Yep.
bag, and that became like a fashion accessory. I think like giving like physical things are coming back in
Yep.
vogue now, especially with like print magazines, and you're seeing a lot of these publications that went digital only relaunching like
Hmm.
a quarterly, not a monthly, but like a quarterly or annual or biannual print, something that they could hold tangibly in their hand as like an extra perk to get people to convert. I think that like goes a long way.
But by the way, we
Any,
have merch that is designed and about 80% to completion. So we have t-shirts, tote bags, candle. Like, I totally agree with you, and we're sort of exploring, is the correct, format for these things. We discovered that, hilariously, we had four t-shirt designs, okay, each in two colorways, each that had to be done in, two t-shirt shapes, or cuts, each that had to be done in extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large. And if you run the numbers on that, I can't. I you end up with, how many, 64 boxes of t-shirts or whatever, various size, cuts, and colors. It's quite complicated. but it's sort of funny, right? I mean, but we have spent a lot of time actually thinking about merch and thinking about that tangible thing, and have uh mocked up a lot of these things, and so that is a project that I expect to see come out in the next couple months, because we are really quite close. I don't know if I can guarantee a t-shirt, but a tote bag is a little bit more one size fits all. So
Yeah, definitely.
um
Maybe that's why they went with the
yeah, I'm
tote
like,
bag. Yeah,
oh, I get it now. Like, the tote bag makes so much sense, and you can kind of fold it up, and it's easier to ship.
or the coffee
But
cup,
the coffee cup, I love the coffee cup, but suddenly you're shipping like this
pieces
thing
of
which can
glass. Yeah,
break, and it's in a box like this, and
make it a metal cup. Make it a
yeah,
to-go cup,
but
insulated to-go
I mean,
cup.
it's really a thing, and I think you really put your finger on it, which is this sort of the tangible thing, right? If
Yeah.
it's
Well,
merch
getting
or a
back to what we were
book,
talking
or
about in the
yeah.
beginning, where you're like, well, we can't get people to pay for online information. It's like give them an excuse to pay for
Yeah, well,
something
that's exact
physical.
that, and
Then,
that's part of the puzzle, right? So is it a book club where you get the book? Is it or a bookmark? Is it the T-shirt? Is it, So believe me, it's in the works. I'll report back when
yeah,
we
I
have
just sent an
T-shirts.
email. I just sent an email to another newsletter writer who's a good designer, literally yesterday, and subject line was like want to do a zine
Yeah,
together, and I've been fixated on I want to like do like just once a year, not like a
yeah.
regular thing, but like is there this extra perk I could send to paid subscribers once a year if for just the annual subscribers or
So
whatever,
I
the
totally agree. And the other thing is, one of the lucky things is we have all this beautiful art because we work with all these illustrators. And I was like, what if we made like a little packet of postcards, 6 postcards, and send them to our best ambassadors and readers, right? Like, and then to me, it's sort of like, oh, every single one of these touch points, if you come to an event, if you get if you get a packet of postcards, if your email is responded to, if you get a comment on your comment, like, all of these touch points make it much harder for you to say, no, thanks, because you've got a connection, right?
okay, Francesca, those are all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Well, you can find us at thepersistent.com. www.thepersistent.com. Come find our website. You can sign up for our newsletter right there. There is a free version, although we strongly advocate you go with the paid version to support independent journalism, which is so important. But by all means, try us for free, and see what you think, and write to me at hello@thepersistent.com and tell me what you think.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Simon.